Hello, everyone. I'm Margie Rosenberg from the IATEFL Membership Committee. On behalf of IATEFL, I would like to welcome you to the fifth webinar in our new webinar series. Our presenter today is Adrian Underhill, an ELT consultant and trainer who works on staff training, leadership, and organizational development. Adrian has also been involved for some time in developing an alternative approach to pronunciation teaching and in bringing this so-called Cinderella of ELT in from the cold. In addition, Adrian is the series editor of the Macmillan books for teachers and author of Sound Foundations and the prize-winning app Sounds, the pronunciation app. His current interests include the emerging post-heroic approaches to leadership, coupled with how complexity impacts on learning and social organization and improvisation in teaching. Adrian is interested as well in the notion that full engagement in one's own learning can in itself be deeply motivating, almost regardless of topic being learnt. He is a past president of IATEFL. This webinar would not be possible without our tech hosts, and I would like to thank Caroline Moore and Heike Philp for their invaluable tech support today, as well as Mercedes Viola, who can't be here, but took care of the technical preparation involved in getting this webinar up and running. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A pod on the screen rather than into the chat box. At the end of the webinar, Adrian will endeavor to answer as many questions as possible. We will make the slides in PDF form from today's webinar available for 1 week on the IATEFL website. They will then be moved to the archives for members to view along with the recording, which will also be uploaded there. As website updates are done by HO, headquarters in the UK, both the slides and recording will not be available until next week. And now, over to Adrian.
Thank you very much, Marjorie, for that splendid introduction. And let me just also thank the people that you mentioned, Caroline, Heike and Mercedes, for their help in getting all this together. And thank you also to all of you out there in various countries of the world, in various time zones. So it won't be afternoon for all of you as it is for me, and it won't be coming on winter for all of you as it is for me. The other thing I want to say is that this is being brought together, of course, by the people mentioned, but it's being brought together also by IATEFL. And in case some of you who are watching this are not members of IATEFL, let me just say that IATEFL is an international association of teachers of English as a foreign language, and it is a most marvelous route to professional connection and professional development. Not only as a recipient, but also as a participant. It's a great way to participate globally from wherever you are. And it's a great way to volunteer. And when you volunteer for IATEFL, you get involved, other people benefit. So it's high impact volunteering, you know, and if you're looking for high impact, consider IATEFL. It's a great way to impact voluntarily and to make a difference to yourself and to other people in the profession. As I hope we are all doing by participating together right now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the jazz of teaching and learning. And I'm going to invite your questions in the question box. And in a moment, I'm going to also invite some additional chat from you. So this is our title, The Jazz of Teaching and Learning. And I'm imagining you watching, and I'm imagining your body movement and feedback. So that's what's going through my mind. Now, improvisation. I see teaching as essentially a performance art. That is, it's co-constructed live in the moment. We plan things beforehand, but actually the real stuff is unfolding in front of us here now. And what we teachers are engaged in, partly, if we can make the time for it and spare the attention, is the student's own learning edge as it unfolds in front of us. So there's improvisation, but it is supported by my preparation. And my preparation is what enables me to be free, hopefully, in the moment to improvise. And I want to develop this this theme. And I think one way we could broach this is to look at other performance artists, other people whose profession is a performance art, because seeing how they work, seeing how they work with the unfolding, never-ending, never surprising present moment is something perhaps very instructive to us. So what we're going to do is to watch a few moments of two great jazz piano players, both deceased now, sadly, Count Basie and Oscar Peterson. And we're going to watch them on two grand pianos. And they will have also bass player and drummer. But we're going to watch these two improvising over a tune, which actually isn't going to be a slow blues. It's going to be a tune called Jumping at the Woodside. So here we are. We're going to watch for a couple of minutes. And what I want you to do, please, is to here's some questions for you. I want you to try to feel and see and imagine what's going on in and between the musicians. How are they connecting? Because they're improvising together. They're making something up together, which means they've got to make space for each other. And something's got to be going on between them. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? And this is where the chat box comes in, because I'm going to ask you whatever it is that you see going on between these two musicians, just to record it in the chat box so that everyone can see. It's possible that some of you, depending where you are, won't be able to see this video, in which case just read the chat, which is being thoughtfully provided by other people who can view it. And then in just a couple of minutes, we're going to stop and we'll take up the story there. So, Caroline, if you can switch this on, we're going to watch Count Basie and Oscar Peterson.
You got it. I know it. Right in here, too.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and some great comments coming from you at the same time. A lot of it is to do, of course, with how they're communicating, how they're pushing each other along, how they are sometimes teasing each other, how they are keeping in contact, how they're watching each other, and indeed what a lot of play there is. And in that play, there's a certain kind of confidence. I feel it's like they're kind of riding, surfing, riding the crest. There's any amount of chaos going on underneath them, but somehow they've found a way to be on a surfboard, riding the chaos, getting carried along by it and not drawn into it. So anyway, there's plenty more like that on YouTube, as you know. And now we're going to continue and make use of what we've just seen. There was a glimpse of others improvising. And one of the first things to notice, apart from the comments that we've made and the joy that we can see going on, is that there's a background structure. And that structure is holding it all together. And that structure kind of holds a place, it holds a cradle for this foreground spontaneity and the interplay. So it's not chaos. You know, this is the discipline that gives creativity. This is the structure that lets things unfold. This is a balance of the two. There's a song structure there. Let's go back to your teaching. Picture yourself writing a lesson plan. Now, the question is, what does that plan do for you? I know what it does for me. What does it do for you? And when do you stick to the plan? How? And when do you depart from the plan? And how do you depart from the plan? What I think happens with most people is that as unpredictable things begin to occur in the lesson, so you depart. And the lesson starts out being kind of fairly structured, but as soon as things begin to happen, as soon as students start to think and to respond, then you're having to let go of the lesson plan. Why? To attend to what needs doing, because what needs doing is not all predictable in the lesson plan. Indeed, it shouldn't be all predictable in the lesson plan. So the class becomes a kind of interaction, a living interaction, rather than enactment of a script. And probably, like, if you're like me at all, you have experience of classes which have remained kind of enactment of a script because they haven't taken off, either because the students didn't take off, or because I was unable to follow them or provide them with what they needed, or keep in touch with their learning. They went off on their own and I wasn't with them. So I was left kind of in the safety net of my lesson plan. So this is, I'm drawing a parallel, obviously, between improvising jazz and improvising in a lesson. Now, this spontaneous interaction, which happens in our lessons, is not really represented in the plan. You can think about it in advance, and it probably helps you a lot, helps me a lot, to think about what might happen. But still, I don't know what's going to happen. Thinking about what might happen prepares me for all the other things that actually do happen. But even so, I don't predict what is going to happen. So this spontaneous interaction is not in the plan, it's not in the course book, it's not in the material, it's not usually in the training or the supervision discussions. And therefore, as I say here, it somehow escapes being articulated, being critiqued, being developed. The spontaneity doesn't really tick boxes. It's not, what we tend to watch for when we're watching lessons is, the usual gambits, the sort of the typical pieces of lesson plan, the typical kinds of activity that we get up, the routines that we get up to in class. But what I'm saying is that this improvisation, which is not those routines, makes up the bulk of most lessons. And so I call it the dark matter of teaching, like this famous dark matter of the universe, which is supposed to be most of the universe, and yet we can't see it. And I'm saying this is kind of like the dark matter of teaching, because it's most of a lesson, and yet somehow it remains a bit undiscerned, a bit unseen, a bit untalked about, a bit uncritiqued. It's the live end of teaching. This improvisation is the part in which we make the contact with the student. We respond to the learning. We create the atmosphere. We're alive. We're alert. We're in interaction, and yet we don't really catch it. We don't really talk about it. We don't really critique it. Hard, therefore, to get better at it. And yet, in other disciplines, in other performance arts, to talk about improvisation is what they do. Jazz players talk about improvisation. The first day, if you go to study drama as an actor, the first day you'll be doing improvisation activities. Improvisation is what they talk about. And yet we don't really talk about improvisation. And as a performance art, I'm saying maybe we should. So here on this slide, I'm saying that the same thing happens to jazz improvisers when they depart from the sheet music. So you go along, you buy your sheet music from the music shop, and there you've got the words and the dots to a typical melody. And you can sit down in front of the piano and you can play that melody. But what jazz musicians do is they depart from that plan. They watch the dots, they can see the chord symbols, they can see the key that they're in. They've got that basic structure of the song, but then within that structure, they depart from it. They leave it behind. And to do that, probably they don't do it alone. Probably they're in perpetual conversation, as we saw just now between Count Basie and Oscar Peterson. They're in conversation with the other players. Now, when you're playing jazz, and my point about jazz is this is directly applicable to teaching, and yet it gives us another perspective, another way of viewing teaching. When you're playing jazz, you've got the sheet music, and what you can do is, number one here, you can play the sheet music. You can play it as it's written. You might play it well or badly, and you might make mistakes or not, but you're playing the sheet music as it is written. You could depart from that a bit and take point number two. You could kind of stretch the sheet music. Not just because you're not a very good player, but you might stretch it because you decide just to play with the notes a little bit, delay a timing, take a few little liberties, just be a little bit cheeky with the music. Or you might go a step further and you might add decorations. So you're playing the sheet music, but then you add a little phrase in the corner there somewhere which doesn't take away from the melody, but adds something, it's a decoration. It doesn't replace, but it decorates. Or you might go further still. So step 4 would be introducing other notes, other rhythms, things that are definitely not there in the sheet music. Alternative notes, alternative bits of rhythm, break up the rhythm. You might go a step further still and actually develop new melodies. These new melodies may take off from the melody that's in the sheet music, and it may indeed make some reference to the melody in the sheet music. But it might be something completely new. You might turn the sheet music melody sort of on its head, or do it backwards, or do it up a few notes, or down a few notes, or you may just depart from it. And so this takes us to number 6, where you might depart completely. And you've played the sheet music a couple of times through, and then gradually you go through 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then you get to number 6, and you really depart entirely, except you haven't departed entirely because the basic structure is still there, as it was when we were watching Basie and Peterson. The basic structure of the lesson plan is still there, even though you're now kind of in free fall, responding to what's going on, which has left the lesson plan, but the lesson plan is still there behind you. Or you can go to number 7, which is depart from everything. For example, let go of the underlying structure and agree with the other musicians that you're going to leave it all behind and you're going to kind of free form jazz for a moment. This too happens in our classes, where we depart entirely from the lesson plan. We agree to suspend it or put it aside for the moment, or completely reconstruct it. So those are degrees of departure from a piece of sheet music, and those are the kind of degrees that jazz improvisers might think of. And I'm saying exactly these same 7 steps are applicable to our kind of classroom teaching. So one of the questions that comes up is, when you're improvising, what is quality? What is the quality in improvisation? Spontaneous doesn't necessarily mean good, and preparation doesn't mean bad. And in fact, you need a lot of preparation for, to support good spontaneity. So how can we measure quality in the case of improvisation? Well, perhaps we need to look back at jazz. In jazz, the quality questions include these. Am I responding to what is actually happening here and now? Are my responses fresh and relevant to what's going on now? Am I coming up with variations of response that I haven't used before, which might indicate that I'm not just repeating myself from last time, but that I'm actually responding to the reality in front of me? Those might be some of the quality questions that you would use in improvising jazz. So we could summarize that by saying, is my response matched to what's happening now? And I'm going to call that spontaneity for the moment. Or is my response actually responding to what happened last time? In other words, it's something out of my memory. It's not really live now. And in music, we call that a hot lick. A hot lick is a phrase which kind of sounds quite clever, but actually it's part of my repertoire. It's not constructed freshly in the moment as a response to what's going on now. It comes out of my repertoire. And so all musicians have hot licks which they kind of fall back on when they're not quite sure what to do. I do. But a hot lick is something from memory, from storage, and it is not an expression of co-creating now with the other people of the present. So we've got this kind, just for the moment, let's draw this tension between spontaneity and hot lick. And so part of our quality question when we're improvising is, to what extent is this genuine spontaneity now? And is it responding to what's going on now? It's got to be spontaneous and it's got to respond to what is happening here. And to what extent is it just a kind of repetition from the past? I'm sure all of you, like me, are well aware of the times when we are repeating things in a class which actually went well and worked in a previous class, but aren't necessarily, as it turns out, relevant to this class. We do something that worked so well last time and it falls flat this time because actually it's out of memory, it's out of storage, it's out of repertoire. It's not out of what is really needed now. It doesn't make sense now. It's like having a great conversation with somebody and trying to repeat something you said in the last great conversation with somebody else. And it falls flat because it was great then, but it's not great now. That's a hot lick. So this division between spontaneity and hot licks would apply equally in jazz or in teaching. Here's just a kind of little summary of what I said. Hot lick, a musical phrase that I've often used, kind of habitual, almost a cliche. Actually, it's a cliche for me. When I play it, they might say, oh yeah, that's Adrian. That's, he always says that, he always does that. It was fresh once, and I was probably very pleased with it. And so I got glued to it and couldn't ever unstick from it. We all do that. But the thing is that now it's not quite right. It's not quite in touch. It's not quite listening. It sounds quite clever, but it isn't really a response to what's happening now. So to keep in touch with this quality standard, what we require is the Queen of Skills. Well, what is the Queen of Skills? Well, you've already been referring to that in some of your chat. In jazz, the Queen of Skills is listening. No big surprise. And an improviser, more than anything, even more than skill on their instrument, needs to be able to listen. One of the worst things is to be in a jazz group with people who are not really listening, but who are listening only to themselves and not to each other. One of the worst things is to be in a jazz group with someone like me when I'm listening only to myself and have kind of got stuck and I'm not really listening and responding to others. So listening puts you in touch with what's happening now. And that's the same in teaching. We know that very well. Question, how do I develop this Queen of Skills? Well, one thing I can do, of course, is to try to be present to my listening, to try and see it, and through it, to make myself available to what is going on now. here are 6 ways to get worse at listening, 6 ways to reduce listening quality. And these are 6 ways that I'm very good at. I'm good at all of these 6 ways of being a poor listener. There are many others as well, but here are 6 particularly good ways of being a bad listener. And, well, you know, try them out. One good way of not listening well is to, while the other person is speaking, to start preparing my answer. I'm pretty good at this, and I start rehearsing it, and I kind of get stuck with my own massaged and ready to go answer. And of course, that's taking away from me listening. Another way, and I'm also good at this, is to judge the speaker or what they're saying. You know, things like, you know, she always says this. It's typical her to be saying this. What do you expect when she or he starts to speak? This is what they're going to, you know. So that kind of inner judgment dialogue. Another is to conduct an inner commentary. Yes, so this is what she's talking about. Yeah, now if I was talking about that, this is what I might be saying. That's. Another one is to worry about what other people are thinking. For example, I'm listening to a student in class, and I don't really listen to that student because I'm worried about what the other students are thinking. So even the student that I'm supposedly attending to isn't really getting my full attention, and notices it, of course, because you can't really speak to someone who isn't fully listening to you. We all know that. Oh, here's a great way. Think about a shopping list. This person always says this. Now I've got time to plan my shopping list for a moment, or to plan the supper, or just daydream. Anyway, those are some great ways, and you probably recognize some of those. You may not be such a bad listener as me, but anyway, those are things that I do. Now, let's just go on. Think about a cocktail party. Would you prepare a script before you go to a cocktail party? You might have in mind 1 or 2 things to say in case you get stuck to conversation. But it wouldn't be very advisable to prepare a whole script. Well, why not? Why couldn't it be advisable to prepare a whole script? Well, obviously, because the other person isn't going to do their part of the script. You can plan a whole game of chess, but actually, as soon as you've made the first move, the other person makes a different move, or your plan comes completely unstuck. So, you know, improvisation hot licks applies to cocktail parties as well. If I'm working only with hot licks in a cocktail party, the conversations aren't going to be very interesting, and I probably only attract to myself other people that also like to make hot lick conversations at cocktail parties. So we rely on our listening. Well, this is obvious stuff to connect with what's happening now, and when we do connect, when the lines are open between me and the student, between me and the other person, the way is open to become participatory and more meaningful. For the event to have meaning for both of us, all of us. So let's just look a little bit at what is spontaneity. And I think this is exactly the same across jazz or teaching or any other performance art. Number 1, well, this is what I've been saying for the last few minutes. Something about spontaneity is a response free from habitual reaction. That's not to say that it'll be entirely free, but it is, as far as I'm able, it's kind of constructed in the moment. Second thing is that spontaneity feeds on and responds to and builds on the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't even know my response to what's going to happen. The alternative to that is to reduce the unknown thing to something that's familiar and then respond to that. So instead of following something new in what someone has said, I reduce it to what I already know and then deal with that. So a conversation becomes a reductive process, or a piece of creativity becomes a reductive process and no longer creativity. Third way of looking at it is that spontaneity is a kind of dance, a movement around, a movement with, an effort to correspond with, perhaps never getting it perfectly right, but a willingness to submit to a movement that's in front of me, the movement of the student's thinking, the movement of the student's learning, the movement of the person in the conversation in the cocktail party. Another thing about spontaneity is this, and this is an interesting point. It draws a fresh world into existence. Instead of drawing in a world that I'm already familiar with, a way of responding, something that's already happened before, spontaneity is allowing something new to exist that didn't exactly exist before. Fifthly, it's playful. I think it's really important that, and again, we saw that with Basie and Peterson. Indeed, they're playing the piano, and we use the same verb there, but they were playing playfully, and we could see the delight and joy of playful interaction. And the last point I want to make here is that I think spontaneity is not an effort. It's a letting go for something to flow. It's not something to strive and strain over, with a furrowed brow. It's a letting go. It's an opening up. It's a being vulnerable. So those are some thoughts about spontaneity. And again, as I've said before, I'm applying these equally across jazz, improvisation, or indeed any other form of improvisation, including theatre and stand-up comedy, for example, or clowning, and teaching. Now, here's a quote from Viola Spolin. Now, this is she was one of the creators in the last century of improvised theatre. So just have a look at this for a moment. I'm not going to read it aloud. Have a look at it. So there's that's quite a major claim or a major insight into what spontaneity could be. The notion that we are reforming ourselves, the notion that we are freeing ourselves from our own handed down frames, from our own memories, from our own old facts, and that there's something free. It's a moment of freedom. When we're actually faced with the thing in front of us, the reality in front of us, the class in front of us, the student in front of us, the student's particular question or learning problem in front of us, and we act according to it, not according to the previous time when we acted. So that's Viola. I was just fiddling around with different websites, and I came because I Googled just spontaneity. And here's something else that I came up with, which actually turned out to be a Tai Chi website. Have a look at this. I like this because it's a quite different perspective. Planning may be necessary. Well, I think it is. Planning may be a hindrance. Well, I think it can be if I get too stuck with it, and if I'm not actually ready myself, if I don't prepare myself. But I like this kind of the physicality of this perspective. When we prepare, we're also there's a minute tensing of the muscles. What an extraordinary thing! And I think this is probably the case. I think I'm preparing. I think I'm getting ready, but at the same time, I'm getting tense, and that tenseness is not just in my mind or my feelings, actually in my body, and that sort of reduces my capacity to act well. So that was a couple of websites just looking on what people had said about spontaneity. So the present moment seems to come into this quite a lot. And I made reference to this a moment ago. So let me just add this. The present moment, is not a given. And I'm speaking for myself, my own sort of existential experience of life. I kind of go around the place encountering one present moment after another, as if the present moment is kind of ready-made. It just hits me in the face and I've got to deal with it. But actually, it's not like that. I mean, one or two present moments might be like if there's an earthquake or a sudden rainstorm. But the present moment is also something that I co-author. I draw it into existence. Something happens, and I help to make the present moment by my response to it. A very clear example of this is when you see, you see out in the park or in the street, a little toddler running along, falls over in front of the parents a little way along, turns around and looks at the mother or father, sort of as if to say, shall I cry or not? And they're looking back to see if the parent is shocked or not shocked. And so a different present moment is drawn into existence according to how to respond to it. So I guess that in a sense, the quality of our experience the quality of our presence draws one or another present moment into existence. You know yourself that when you're in a certain frame and students respond with something, you can react one way and another time react another way. So even within ourselves, we are quite capable of drawing different present moments into existence. And I think this is part of the structure of spontaneity, the understanding that we are causal to the present moment. We are not just a victim of the present moment. Well, yeah, don't be too certain. Question, what's the jazz in your teaching? In jazz, you have to listen because you don't know what's going to happen next. But also something else about jazz is that mistakes are not fatal. In fact, if you're a good improviser, they become part of skillful improvisation. Miles Davis, the great jazz trumpeter, said there aren't any mistakes in jazz. So in teaching, are mistakes a gift to the class, which tell us what to do next, or are mistakes a nuisance in our class? Do mistakes open another door, or do they make us quietly curse because it means somehow we've got to press pause on the lesson plan while we spend time dealing with this mistake? So something about mistakes being part of the unexpected material, the food of spontaneity. Catherine Bateson, nice quote, living itself is an improvisatory art. Just living, going out, buying a newspaper, walking down the street. We buy a newspaper spontaneously or, as a hot lick. Discuss. Right, 7 suggestions for making improvisation and spontaneity more visible and more discussable during teacher training and supervision. And these suggestions were, at least in part, put together by for a workshop that I did with Alan Maley. So quite a number of these suggestions owe something to him. Well, we could focus on presentation skills in our teacher training. We could focus on how people present themselves, not just the presentation of a lesson, but how you present yourself. We could utilize theatre games, which involve different roles, different statuses, surprises, and responding to things that weren't expected. We could reflect more than perhaps we do at the moment on methodologies which avoid pre-planning, which actually do not use pre-planning, in fact, which consciously choose not to pre-plan. The Silent Way and community language learning have no syllabus at all, and they're structured around having no syllabus because the syllabus arises spontaneously. They have a structured way of making use of spontaneity, as does theatre. John Fanslow has a great book called Breaking Rules, and in order to provoke unpredictability, find what you typically do and just do the opposite, not because it's better or because it's worse, but because it will free you up and because you'll learn something. Include spontaneity in observation discussions. So don't just look for the easily observable chunks of teaching. The stretches of structured technique, but actually look for the in-between bits, the bits where we're unsure. Look for how we improvise and find ways of talking about it. Number 6, Learn to teach as an act of inquiry, rather than just trying to get it right. It's hard for us teachers because we want a good, what we call a good class. We want our teachers, our students to get it. We desperately want our students to learn and to advance. And at least speaking for myself, this can make it hard to really be an inquirer of my teaching, because I'm so much wanting to get it right that when I don't get it right, I kind of feel taken aback, and I'm not really in the mood for inquiry. Last but not least, spend less time trying to control, because I think trying to control has a negative effect on spontaneity. Trying to control people and trying to get people to do what we want. And as I've often said, it's a lot more fun just connecting with people, because by connecting, actually a different kind of control arises. And in connection, there is spontaneity. So anyway, there are 7 possible ways of including more attention to improvisation in the way we go about training teachers in service and pre-service training. And here are another 7 suggestions for spontaneity. The first one I've just made: bother less about trying to control and instead encourage connectivity. Same in a class, get people connected. Number 2, work with what's happening rather than what you wish was happening. So, I often catch myself wishing that something was happening. I've got this in mind that I want to happen. It's got to happen. So I'm trying to control events to make what I want to happen, rather than actually dealing with what is happening. It's like, you take a group of kids for a picnic and everything's nice. You're by the river and you're in a wood and the kids are having a great time. But I can easily spoil that great time by trying to insist that certain things happen, rather than by widening my gaze, seeing what is going on, being ready to support where it's needed, and letting happen what's happening, while perhaps adding to it. So, I'm well aware in myself of that dichotomy between trying to control and trying to connect, and between trying to work with what really is happening, and on the other hand, trying to imprint what I want to happen on it. Start conversations with about whatever matters. Well, this is another one. Get people talking about what matters to them at the moment. Here's one I've often said, give up trying to be interesting. This is a difficult one for teachers. Forget it. Connect, because actually the connection is more interesting than being interesting. And finally, actually, no, there's 2 more to come, I think. Make plans. And this is part of improvisation, isn't it? Make plans, but don't expect them to work out, and even don't try to get them to work out. Have them there as the safety net. Have them there as the structure out of which comes the creativity, as the sheet music out of which can come the improvisation. We can always fall back on it if we get stuck. I think there's a couple more things here. Let me just have a look. Yeah. Increase intuition, so follow hunches, be vulnerable, risk fear, leave gaps, those sort of things they say to you in theatre school. Welcome student spontaneity. And last but not least, see my class and my staff room and my school as an adventure park for my learning, for my improvising. So this is my question to me and to you. Where is the jazz in your ELT? I talked about the dark matter of teaching. And by dark matter, I mean this improvisation, which is not in the lesson plan, and it's even not in my memory at the end of the class. And yet it may be, in some ways, the bulk of the class. How can I work on the quality of that improvisation, since that is what affects the atmosphere, affects the learning, and so on? Last but not least, I'm saying the problem with sticking to the plan lies with the sticking and not with the plan. So that's it. Now, it's we've got a few minutes left, and what I'm going to try and do is, if I can find these some questions, I'm going to try and pick out some, and there's loads here, so many that I won't be able to answer them all. Let's just see if there's anything else here. No, it just says thank you. Okay, so thank you, and in a moment we'll have probably something that reminds us of the next webinar. But right now, I'm going to have a look here. New teachers will probably start by following the plan as originally written. But as they gain, well, I've lost this now. Hang on. Let me try and get back to that question. Now, here we are. New teachers will probably start by following the plan as originally written. But as they gain experience, they'll improvise. So the more experience we have as teachers, the more improvisation will be seen in our class. Do you agree? Yes, I agree, but yes, I agree, but. And the but is that improvisation is not part, I don't think, sufficiently part of our teaching methodology. Therefore, yes, we do pick it up, but I don't think it is fully encouraged. It's not given as a clear-cut destination, which we will do more and more of. And indeed, I think that we could be helped even as new teachers. We want to stick to the plan. We want to be told what to do, sure. But a lot of what happens for new teachers is also spontaneity, is also awkward spontaneity. And I think to have that picked up, and not to see that as being wrong, but to see that that is my spontaneity, and gradually I'm going to become more comfortable with it. I think we can flag it from the start, I guess is what I'm saying. So yes, I think new teachers will start by following a plan. But, you know, I don't accept that absolutely fully. I wonder if even that is a product of our system. You know, you give a toy to a kid, they just improvise with it and work out how to play with it. So yes, I agree that is the state of affairs. New teachers want a plan, but I think even then I wonder if it's part of our methodology that they want a plan. This is a question from Marjorie. How should we deal with superiors who expect a detailed lesson plan which we're supposed to follow? It seems that like anything else, this is a great help when we start out, and later we need the room to react as well. So it's a similar question. But of course, yeah, part of our quality control is that people come and observe our classes and they want our lessons and they want our lesson plans and they want to see it. It's all got to fit together. And you may even be afraid that unless you follow that lesson plan, you're going to get marked down. This is tough stuff. This is really tough stuff. And I think it's an enormous shame that this should happen, or indeed that we should fear this happening. And therefore, one of the reasons why I'm giving this kind of talk and thinking about this kind of thing is to try to bring to our profession more openness to the importance of improvising, which already exists in other art forms, but not in ours. Let's have a look at some others here. God, there's so many. They're all such interesting questions. Would you agree that being right is necessary for a foreigner teacher teaching English as a foreign language, and that he can improvise only within his own verbal potential if he's not to ruin the process of learning entirely? Well, this is a good question. But in other art forms, you don't have to be excellent as a jazz musician in order to have a very good time. What you have to do is to listen, be playful, have fun, know your limitations, and not to pretend to be more than you are. So I suppose, but I'm not in a good position to pronounce on this, I suppose that it is possible for a teacher who does not have complete, who feels that they do not have complete mastery of the English that they want, nevertheless, to have a lot of fun and to be able to expose and make use of not knowing and to be able to make use of the students. In other words, for that teacher to be a learning companion and not only to see themselves as teacher in the sense of one who knows everything. There are other kinds of teacher who are great companions to learning. So we don't have to know something all the time, and it's true of native speakers as well. Here's another question. I can't help feeling that there's something within the category of hot licks that might be called using your experience. Clearly, this can become ritualized and frozen, but sometimes it can also be a precise response to what is happening in the class at the moment. Your view on this would be interesting. Yeah, this is from Barry Cusack in the UK. I do agree that when we are taking something from our experience and using it not in a ritualized and frozen way, but recreating it to really respond to the moment, then I think that is what I would call improvisation. And that's what jazz musicians are doing. They are recreating it for the present moment. And therefore it does become a precise response. It is not a substitute for listening, because the listening is going on and something is being pulled out of the cupboard, and yet it's being refashioned for what is happening right now. Here's another from Patricia, Argentina. I think drama techniques can greatly help spontaneity. Do you agree? Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot in drama that could be very, very helpful. I really do believe that a lot of life skills, not just language, could be learned through various forms of drama. And my reading suggests that even the ancient Greeks were up to that. They didn't just have comedies and tragedies. They actually used drama in quite everyday ways for the solution of problems, as indeed we do today in this discipline called psychodrama. So yeah, I think that drama techniques and drama thinking would be a really suitable way for us teachers. And I don't just mean acting out sketches. I mean using the help that drama can bring to respond to unexpected situations, to respond creatively, enjoyably, playfully in unexpected situations. I think drama has really got a lot to show us there. And I'm kind of surprised that we still, after all these years, have not taken that on board. Where are we going now? Here we are. We're going to India, Divya. As you mentioned, spontaneity makes one vulnerable. How do you deal with this in teacher training? Well, first of all, by recognizing it. Let's suppose that I'm a trainer and I've been observing a lesson, and now I'm having a conversation with the trainee teacher, supervision session. So I want to ask her or him, how they felt that moment when they were vulnerable, and I want to recognize that that is okay, not that it's bad to be vulnerable. It's okay. So let me, instead of saying, don't get yourself into a vulnerable situation, let's look at ways of dealing with a situation once you become vulnerable. It's okay to be vulnerable. In fact, there's a lot to be said to be vulnerable. So how can we manage that? What are some ways out of sticky corners? How do we deal with traps, some of which we set ourselves? How do we deal with that? I think that vulnerability is okay. So I want to accept vulnerability. And when a teacher makes themselves vulnerable, I don't want to imply or say that that is a negative and they shouldn't be doing it. I want to say that opening up in that way is perhaps a really useful moment. Now, the next thing to learn is what to do about it, how to survive well, how to come out of it, how to make use of it playfully. Maria Costa in Portugal. Within this jazz of teaching and learning, do you think that gathering, flexibility and control are just the required features to achieve the beauty of jazz? Oh, that's a tough question. Within this jazz of teaching and learning, do you think that gathering, flexibility and control are the required features? Certainly flexibility. I'm not sure about overmuch control. I think the ability to perhaps control and to know ourselves as people that do try to control it is important. But I'm not sure that control is the way to go to have a creative time or a playful time or to relate well. I'm not sure that control leads to good relating. Flexibility does, I think. There's so many questions here that I don't even know where to begin. Let's go here. Bethany, hi. Do you think controlled practice and spontaneity, letting go, could be mixed? So control and spontaneity. Yeah, I really do think that they can be mixed. And what I think that happens at the moment is the control, because it's more clearly articulated and more present in our plans, and we're given more techniques for the controlling bit, has the upper hand. And the spontaneity bit, because it's not in our plans and perhaps can't be, and because we don't practice it and talk about it and develop it and critique it, is the one that gets left out in that mix. Yeah, I think we can move between tension and release, between more control and more spontaneity. You know, that's what drama is about. It's what creativity is about, perhaps moving between tension and release. It's what music's about. Perhaps it's what lessons is about. But I think that it's difficult to have that movement when spontaneity draws the short straw all the time. Halima, Uzbekistan, hello. Can we call the English learning at the cocktail party? People learn here too. Informal teaching learning then. I don't understand the question. Can we call the English learning at a cocktail party? Well, you might learn English at a cocktail party. Yeah, you might learn. I don't know. I can't answer that question because I'm not quite clear what it means. I'm going to move on. Hannah, Lithuania. I wonder if you have any advice on how to become more aware of the handed-down frames so we can liberate ourselves and our students and explore the freedom of spontaneity. That's a great question. It really is a great question. And I think that part of that is the necessary reflective practice, so that when we have done a piece of teaching and we reflect on it, or indeed when we reflect during action, it's one of the questions. How much of what I'm doing can I say is sort of handed down? In the end, everything perhaps is handed down, but how can I become more observant of and critical of the qualities of handed downness in me? And how can I become able to critique this handed downness and say, that was too handed down. I would like, here's some alternative things I could have done there. On the other hand, that thing which was handed down fitted okay, so I'll let that pass for the moment. Reflective practice, I think, is the way to go about that. And of course, if one can find another colleague with whom also to practice reflectively and to have reflective discussions, so much the better. Okay, now then, I'm going to scroll up the top here. We've got a couple of minutes left. Here's from Paul. Would you please mention something about how this may or may not affect prescriptive and descriptive teaching pedagogies? Now, my goodness, this is going to require all my thinking skills. Mention how this may or may not affect prescriptive and descriptive teaching pedagogies. I'm not sure I can answer that question. In conversation I could, but I don't think I can do that right now.
I don't know if you can hear me. I think we are actually a little bit over our time. Can everyone hear me? I can't get the chat box back. Frozen. Yes. Okay. Adrian, I think you stopped with a question that would take a bit of time, but you answered so many of these, and we had just great questions here. Wonderful. I just want to say thank you to everyone, obviously, of course, to Adrian for giving us his time today and explaining all of this so wonderfully. This recording will be in the archives as of sometime next week for members to view again. I'll have to watch it as well because I was busy with the chat box. And the slides, as we said, will be coming up. Yes, we'd like to go on after thanking Adrian again to the next announcement of the next webinar, which is with Vicki Hollett, who is here online. And we are going to upgrade her so she can say a couple of words about her upcoming webinar.
Hey, that's great.
And I counted 27 countries of the people who wrote them in, of the participants, and another 3 or 4 with those of us. Here comes Vicki. So it's wonderful to see that we are reaching people all over the world. Hi, Vicki.
Hi there. I don't know if you can hear me yet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh,
Yeah.
great. I really enjoyed that session. Thank you so much, Adrian.
Thank you, Vicky.
And to fill you in on what I'll be talking about, some of you may not know this, but I'm actually learning to speak American myself. And I've been living in the States now for 14 years. And so I'm going to be speaking about that. And it's my favorite subject. It's quite funny because I screw up a lot. I have to improvise a lot, Adrian. And but it's also quite deep because it's basically a talk about pragmatics and sociolinguistics and politeness, linguistic politeness styles. So I hope folks will be able to come along, and it should be a lot of fun. Thank you.
Wonderful. We're really looking forward to Vicky. For those who are interested in the rest of the program, it is all on the IATEFL website. If you go to the IATEFL website, you will find it all under webinars, which is also where we will be putting the slides at the moment, and under the members section is where you will find all of the previous webinars. As I said, this is the 5th one in the series. We're planned all the way through February, and we are working on more. Okay, so I'd like to say thank you to everyone, and going to sign off soon. Thank you, Caroline. That's perfect. And again, thanks to Adrian, especially for his time today, and for our wonderful tech hosts, Caroline Heike and Mercedes, who had been working in the background before it all began. And to
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, IATEFL.
We had several musicians online today, and yeah, fascinating to hear. Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks, Mike.